Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Unstoppable Dad Project for another week. Thank you for joining us and taking the time out of your busy life to listen to our podcast that we've got going on here. This week, the name of the podcast is Staying in the Fight, even when you feel like you are continually getting beat up, because this is just something that and it's a feeling that I am 100% sure that the vast majority of us go through at different points in our life. And it's something that for me, I feel like I've been through a lot and I dip in and out of from time to time. In fact, the most recent time was probably a few months ago in the middle of the year when, from a business point of view, things were very, very tough. During that time, I was obviously very thankful for my wife and my children, being able to go home to them. But there was a lot of heaviness in my life. There was a lot of things that felt like they weren't just going right. And it was very hard for me day to day to wake up and continue to do the things that I felt like I needed to do to move myself forward. And for us, I was just relying on probably grit and determination. And I know a lot of dads out there and a lot of people out there on a daily basis go through this for probably a lot longer period than what I have. Some people that I've spoken to in the past, it's years that they go through this, where they're waking up and they're just doing it. They're doing whatever they need to do just to kind of survive. They're scraping by. And it feels like this never ended defeating feeling where you're in the fight and we're moving forward, but it just feels like every single day you're getting beat up, you're walking into more punches, and you just can't get out of the ring. You're locked in that ring and you just can't take a step out of it because you've got to keep taking some action. You've got to keep moving forward. And the only thing that's keeping you on path and keeping you going is that you need to provide for the family. You need to be the husband and father, the leader for that family, and make sure that they've got a roof over their head, there's food on the table, and everybody's taken care of. And it's a very hard spot to be in because it's very hard to see a way out of that. And most of the time, it's even hard to continue to take that action. But you know what? You keep doing it. I keep doing it because we know we have to. We know we have to keep going through that grind. And I guess why I wanted to talk about that, because sometimes when we're going through that, it's hard to step back and take a bird's eye view on what's going on and how far we've come and what we've able to do. And it's very hard to get out of this defeatist mindset of I am where I am and I can't do anything about it. And it's hard to sometimes take different actions and different steps because maybe, one, we don't know what actions and steps that we've got to take, which I think for a lot of people, and I know speaking from my personal experience, not knowing what steps to take to get out of it was a big one. Being the other thing that I identified within myself and where I was at was, as much as I didn't like being where I was, there was almost some weird comfort in being in that space and being in that dark space, where being in that place, as uncomfortable as it felt, and as much as it felt like I was getting beat up every time, I was taking a step or taking an action, and it felt like I was in quicksand. The more I struggled, the more I worked, the deeper I sunk. There was this strange level of comfort and me being okay with being there, to the point where the change that I needed to make or the actions that I needed to take almost perceived to be more uncomfortable than actually staying where I was. And for me, that was a really bad trap to be in, because I felt like I was there and I knew that something needed to change, but just in my head, I knew I'm kind of comfortable here. We weren't in danger of losing too much. My hand wasn't being forced either way, but I just wasn't happy with what I was doing. And it was getting hard for me to continue to take the daily action that I needed to in order to move things forward. And all too often I hear this story, I hear this feeling of quicksand from other dads and parents where it's like, I've just got to keep the grind up, because if I do this for like another 5 years, then we'll be at this place. Or if I just keep doing this for now, like we'll be okay. But the problem is that it maybe never moves forward. We also maybe never actually take the time to appreciate how far we've come, because we're trapped in it so much. For me, when I was in that space, there was a lot of thoughts that were going through my mind, but the predominant one was that I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. And this is something all the time that I come up against when we talk to people about training. Like people, especially those people who have been in it for a little while, like they've been training pretty consistently for 3, 4, 5 years, maybe even less, like 2 years, but they're past that kind of initial 12 months. So for a lot of people, that's a long time to commit to something like a training regime. But they get that, let's say 18 months, 2 years in, and they feel like they're not getting anywhere. So I feel like I'm not getting anywhere. But then when we sit down, and these are the type of people that are generally pretty good with recording their results. They're good at keeping track of things. They're definitely consistent with, their action, which is a big thing to move the needle forward, just consistency through good targeted action. And, they have a bad month. They have a bad month and they feel like they're not getting anywhere. So what we do as an exercise is we actually step back and we widen the field of what we look at their success on, because in that time frame leading up to that, they've been able to look at it on, say, 4-week blocks, because everything moves forward in a manner when you first start training where you will take big jumps over like those 4-week blocks. Or even if they're not big jumps, you can see like tangible things moving forward. But the longer you're in it, the less incremental that change is, but the change still happens. So it means that looking at the success of what you are doing on a longer term. So for this particular instance, instead of looking at the last 4 weeks, we look at the last 12 weeks or the last 16 weeks. And then when we start doing that and we remove emotion from it, we remove that feeling of not getting anywhere, we can actually see that there has been progress. It's just not linear. And what's happening is you've got this linear progress to begin with, and then there's a little dip. And for a lot of us, it's never a dip back to like that 0 point. Sometimes it is. And sometimes you've just got to dust off. You've got to get back to taking that action and you've got to start moving forward. It can be a full reset, but a lot of the time it's not. And I know for where I was a few months ago, that was kind of where we were at, where it was a dip, but it wasn't a full reset. And when we talk to people about the training, that's what they're seeing. But when they're looking at it, the scale that they're looking at it on is after that linear progression, the very top point, and then the end of the dip, and they're forgetting everything that's come before that. So then when we look at it on a wider scale, they can see, oh, look, I still have improved a good amount. I'm just going through a dip. And then all of a sudden it turns and it goes up again. And then that same thing happens. It kind of plateaus off. Sometimes it comes back down a bit and then it goes up, because success over a long period isn't linear. And I feel like when it comes to business, when it comes to, personal success and some things that we are working for, providing the action that we are taking is targeted and it's the right action, that we have to go through periods where we just need to stay in the fight, get beat up a little bit, and then we can come out the other side of that. And it's hard to be positive and it's hard to be optimistic when you're caught up in it. In fact, for a lot of us, and I know for me personally, like the default, like a lot of us can handle a bad week. We can probably even handle a bad 2 weeks, bad 3 weeks, bad 4 weeks. All of a sudden, when these punches start adding up, it becomes really hard to turn that mindset and keep that positive mindset and that optimistic mindset. And throughout that time, like if things are changing, yes, maybe there needs to be some changes in approach. And I know, like for me in that period that I was going through, it was hard for me to change my approach because there was some weird level of comfort in that pain that I was experiencing. And this is something I see all the time where and when I say I shouldn't say all the time, but I see it come up a lot when I talk to people. I talk to dads and I talk to people that I train, where it's like, there's kind of this voice in the back of their head that tells them they need to get out of the quicksand, or that, they need to grab onto the land that's just outside of the quicksand and try and try and climb out. But there's this weird level of comfort in that sinking feeling that's happening with them, which is almost which is more comfortable to them. And the change that they need to take and the action that they need to take is more uncomfortable than what they're feeling now. And it's not until they struggle to a point where maybe they're starting to get out of breath that now the position that you're in is more uncomfortable than the action you need to take. And one thing I'm trying to do, and I try and do with other people, is try and highlight that and hopefully not get to a point where you can't breathe before you have to take action. And I'll be honest, the stage that I was at in that middle part of the year, it took a pretty big thing for me to actually turn that around and start looking at things in a different light. And sometimes it's not just as easy as changing your mindset. I'm not saying that that is the be all and end all and, hey, think positive thoughts and everything's going to be all right, because sometimes you do need to actually change your approach. For me, where I was at, it had a lot to do with my mindset around it. It had a lot to do with my mindset around circumstances and around a lot of external things that were going on in the world. And when I shifted that mindset, and not only shifted the mindset, but stood back, like what I was talking about with people in their training, where I stood back and I looked at, because for me, a big feeling was I wasn't getting anywhere. And I look back on a larger scale rather than just, hey, I've got to a point and now we're in a bit of a regression and I'm only looking at those regression as my starting point and my end point. Instead of that, looking a little bit further down the path and actually seeing, hey, look, we're not doing too bad, but it's just a tough time right now. And then when I changed that mindset, things started to turn around. The interactions I were having with people was a lot more positive and a lot better. And things started to move in the right direction. And the only reason I wanted to talk about this was because obviously I've talked about a lot of my emotions and things that I've been through on this podcast over the last almost 9 months now. But I had an instance where that started to come back up again early this week. A couple of things didn't go right. Had a pretty shitty day on Monday. And then what happened was, because I'd identified that kind of thought process for myself early on, it didn't spiral out of control like it did earlier on in the year. And I'm hoping that, having a little bit more of a positive outlook is going to impact the way, because now I'm recording this on a Thursday. We had a pretty good couple of days outside of that first day. Or I did. I felt good. I felt more positive. Was literally just hitting that reset button after Monday and be like, hey, look, it's a shit day. I'm just going to move forward. And sometimes that's what's needed. But, and I'll finish off on this, if you're really struggling with that and you feel like you are in quicksand and you can't get out, and it's been happening for a long period of time, it's probably time to go and talk to somebody and get some help. Because it may not be a matter of, I'm just going to wake up the next day and I'm going to be positive thinking and I'm going to be good to go, especially if it's gone on for a prolonged period of time. Because maybe you need an outside perspective to look at a different action that you need to take. And that was actually, there was a few different things that kind of snapped me out of that funk that I was in the middle of the year, and have done so at different points in my life. And a lot of them have actually been brought around by suggestions from people who aren't me, whether it be talking to a business coach or it be talking to, a professional, depending on what it is that I'm having that bad feeling about. If it's a prolonged feeling, I encourage you and I implore you to go and talk to somebody, because we all go through bad periods. But if it's going on for too long and it's starting to affect other aspects of your life, it may mean that you need an outsider's perspective. And it's not weakness. It is not something that you shouldn't do, regardless of what your mindset is around it. It is probably something that it is needed, and not waiting until you get to a point where you're unable to breathe and that action and that feeling is filtered into every other aspect of your life, because you will come out of it. There's going to be times where sometimes we just need to put our head down and keep plowing through regardless, and keep taking that action, even if we get beat up a little bit. But we shouldn't be standing in that ring for 12 months, 2 years, 3 years at a time and expecting a different result, because you're not going to keep beating your head against a brick wall because it feels good. So finishing off on that, hopefully you got some value out of this discussion. Let me know if you've been through it. If you're going through it right now, reach out, have a chat. I'm not, if you are really in it badly and you are having some pretty deep and dark, serious thoughts, please reach out and talk to somebody. We're all here to help. We want dads to be stronger together. We want families to be stronger together, and to try and kind of lead that next generation to be strong, and for us to be the leaders of them. So thanks for listening. If you are able to, please jump on and follow us on social medias. So at The Unstoppable Dad on Instagram, The Unstoppable Dad Project on Facebook. While you're on Facebook, if you're a dad and you want to jump into a community, we have a free Facebook group that you can jump in there. I got plenty of free information in there for you to dig your teeth into around training, nutrition, mindset, and all that type of stuff. And if you are interested in working together, we have an online program available to help dads that are looking to reclaim their athleticism and their health. So that is it for this week. Thanks again for listening. Take care. See you next week. Bye.